to the VA. And what we found is that doctors were scanning in these medical records, and they were scanning them as what seemed like an innocuous choice between 3 different things. And given how many people here have been working in the department, I think that you'll know that it's not an innocuous choice. PDF, TIFF, or JPEG were the 3 choices. What's the correct answer? PDF. What happens to the other ones? They go nowhere. So as we were going through this process, and later as I would tell this story, I would have a number of different families and people who come up to me and they tell me a story of how their loved one had cancer. Medical records were incomplete service treatment record, and they would actually lose their lives. They would die. I think that's unbelievable. Because in 45 days, we wrote file format converters for TIFFs and JPEGs, turning them into PDFs. This is not hard work. Right? And it would forever change the lives of a bunch of people who I'll never meet, that I don't know. And I think that that is an incredible thing, because the Department of Defense runs one of the most incredibly technical mission sets in the entire world. But sometimes it is stuck within the confines of carbonite, right? We have systems that have aged, that are no longer able to fulfill the mission that they need to. And sometimes things will sit, even with really great, amazing mission-driven people who are working on these things, but that still sometimes isn't enough. It's why I asked this one thing, right? How many of you here at this audience, I'm assuming that everybody here, you're at this conference, so you want to change things, right? That's why you're here. But I can tell you it's going to take a lot of us. I think I heard Hondo say it's going to take more than this room, and I can definitely agree with that. And I'm not talking about innovation. This is probably my least favorite word in the world. And I want to go through why innovation is such a dangerous thing to throw around. Innovation is not a thing that you just set out on a course and you're like, you know what tomorrow we're going to do? We're going to innovate tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to do innovative things. I was in a meeting once and a person was like, we do really innovative things. We're going to innovate, and we're going to innovate on top of that. And by the way, look at all the innovation that we're doing. This was an organization, by the way, that takes 16 years to do an acquisition. Does that sound innovative to you? 16 years, are you kidding me? You just used the word innovation like it was a comma. How can that be? No, so here, look, this is why I'm here. This is my talk, and what I want to go through with you is why I think that sometimes, really the thing is, we have to think of ourselves as a little bit more like the rebels, right? Because you, and people like you, and people like me, if we show up and we work on actually disruptive things, sometimes things that are not going to always be popular, sometimes things that people aren't always going to be happy about, then maybe, just maybe, there will be somebody whose life you will forever change, and they may never even have the chance or opportunity to meet you, but I think I would take that any day of the week. I would take that any day of the week. Raise your hand. Would you take that? Yes. Good. This leads me to my first point. There will be enemies. This is the thing. Innovation is actually really hard, right? Because it is not a thing that you set out to do. It requires disruption underneath it, right? And what's on the other side of disruption? Somebody who actually is doing it the way that it just works, right? It's funny, a long time ago there was a person in my team who wrote something up on one of our walls in the office at the Pentagon. It said, government hates 2 things. 1, the way things are, and 2, change. and I looked through it, and the reason I like to call this out is because it's actually really hard. The work that all of you want to do, when we want to change things, it's hard. It's not to say that somebody's not well-meaning on the other side. It's not that the system that was there to move service treatment records was being developed or run by people who didn't care. That is an incorrect way to look at it. But you have to realize that when you come in and you change things, there's somebody who's on the other side of that, and it's not always going to be popular. I believe that the rebels, the insurgents, I think that the thing that you, people like you and people like me, I think that the thing that we do is we make hard decisions up front. We make the hard decisions up front so that we can make sure that by the time that others are using the things that we're working on or the systems that we're trying to change, that they actually are delighted and like to use them, and it does the thing that it's supposed to do. But there will be enemies. I happen to work on a thing called Jedi Cloud. Who's heard of Jedi Cloud? At least 3 people weren't happy with that. At least 3, maybe 4. But you know what? Here's the thing. To disrupt and to change, to build an insurgency, we have to work on things that matter. We have to say that we're going to work on something that is important. Over time at Defense Digital Service, we had 3 criteria for every project that we would work on. 3 criteria. It's actually pretty simple. And I love the first one because it's so non-DoD sounding. Does it matter? Is it going to have an order of magnitude impact? It's amazing because it actually would lead to responses like this. No, I'm not going to work on your dashboard. I'm not going to work on a dashboard, right? Because it's not going to matter. It's not going to move the needle. We want to work on big things. And I think that as we're looking for the types of things that we want to work on, I think that the big thing here is that we want to find projects that aren't so big sometimes that we can't accomplish them, but we want to work on things that people are going to say, hey, that was an order of magnitude better than where we were before. And actually, going back to service treatment records, 45 days we wrote file format converters, and 5% of the time, 5% of the time, somebody's life could be altered by that. That's amazing. That's incredible for 45 days worth of work. I think that that's special. This leads me to my other thing. Delivery is a superpower. Delivery is an incredible superpower. There's so many things that we can work on that'll take years, that we can spend so much time thinking about. But what if you actually did something that could deliver results in 3 months? We launched a program a few years ago called Hack the Pentagon. Has everybody heard about this? Do you know what Hack the Pentagon is? So Hack the Pentagon was the first time that the federal government had ever done a bug bounty. So this is an idea where we invite hackers to essentially beat the shit out of our systems, and we pay them for finding vulnerabilities in the systems we have. And it started on something that was so seemingly small and unimportant. It started against a thing called defense.gov, right? Or defense.no, or whatever. The reason that we started with that is because we had never done a bug bounty in the federal government. And so we said, okay, we need to do this extremely fast, and we need to actually deliver. So we did a simplified acquisition, and within months, the government went from never having done a bug bounty to a bug bounty was checked off a list. And then it became a huge program, and we worked on a bunch of things, including weapons platforms and a bunch of other interesting things. And the targets of the program became much more interesting. But we started with something small, and we decided to go fast. I think that delivery is a superpower. It's the thing that actually any team that wants to disrupt should never forget: speed. I think sometimes we forget that. It's one thing to show up and say, hey, I want to change things. It's one thing to show up and say, hey, I'm going to change this in 3 months. I love that time period. I almost always had every DDS project work on things within 3 months. The company that we started recently called Rebellion, almost everything works within 3-month increments. I think it's enough time for us to understand if we're actually going to deliver. Your results may vary, but I think that at the end of the day, delivery is a superpower, and we should never forget that because nobody expects it. How many people expect government systems to change every 3 months? I just want to go on record. You, I love your optimism. Like you, I want you to come join what I'm doing.
Well, I get software patch updates like every other day.
There you go. There you go. That is, we need it to be across the board, right? There's so much opportunity, but delivery is a superpower. And I have that guy come along with you. And I think that it's okay to be different. You know, it's funny. So, you know, a lot of the initial articles about Defense Digital Service would be about how me and my team dressed, almost everything. It would be like, oh, Chris Lynch and his team, they wear hoodies and they wear jeans and things like that. What I loved is at the end of my time at the Pentagon, very few things would actually talk about that. I loved that. I thought that that was so special and spectacular. The results have to speak for themselves. You have to work on things that matter. You have to do important things, and you have to deliver results at the end of the day. But it also had another interesting side effect, right? I went to go, I walked into the office of somebody who was running Ledge Affairs at the time when I first showed up at the DoD. And I was like, hey, is such and such in the office? And their person looked at me and they're like, yeah. And then they started to step away and they're like, do you need his laptop? And I was like, laptop? I was like, no, I don't need his laptop. And they're like, oh, okay, great. And they took another couple steps. I was like, do you need his cell phone? And I was like, this is great. Like, I should take his cell phone and his laptop and walk away. How amazing. This is the greatest social engineering in the world. If you show up in the Pentagon in a t-shirt, everybody thinks that they know exactly what you're doing. And I have many more great stories about that. But I actually took that to be something that was just very easy, and it would become pattern recognition over time. I think that these things, these cells, things like Kessel Run, you know, you walk in, it's clear that it's different. I think that that's okay. I think we have to do those things. I think that when you can easily visually be like, oh, that's a nerd, like, great, right? That's a nerd. I know what a nerd looks like. Because then when we're actually sitting around and there's 10 people, or one of the, you know, those meetings where there's like 50 people in the room and there's a bunch of people sitting in the back, and everybody could just be like, there's the nerd. Like, at least one's in the room, right? Like, I think that that helps. There's something about pattern recognition, right? I come from a whole industry long before DoD that lives and breathes and dies on pattern recognition. But it just makes it super simple. They could be like, oh, Chris Lynch wears Star Wars t-shirts. Great, right? I think that that's important. And here's the thing, at the end of the day, I got the best compliment a few weeks before I left the Pentagon. Somebody said, you know, despite how you dress, you're actually very professional. And I thought, thank you. But at the end of the day, I think that, you know, the guy who's standing next to me in this picture, his name is Paul Tagliamonte. Paul helped build, has anybody ever heard of Debian or Ubuntu? Yeah, he helped build that. That's what he did when he started building that when he was very, very young. He's a spectacular person. That guy delivers, right? He's an amazing person. And we got him to come into the mission of national defense. And it's very easy to be like, oh, that's a nerd, right? That makes it simple. So I think that that's okay. I think it's actually somewhat important sometimes. I love this picture. So as Hack the Pentagon would grow, we would do these variations: hack the Army, hack the Air Force. Raina Staley, who started Defense Digital Service, who's sitting up here in the front row, would also end up running the Hack the Pentagon program. This is that is actually the most stereotypical hacker, right? Right? He's got the hoodie, right? Where I was like, they always wear hoodies, right? Every hacker. Next to person in the Air Force. I think that's incredible, right? And I think about this idea of, hey, how do we grow these rebellions, right? Things like hack the Air Force. Here we have somebody who's literally their entire job is to, or life revolves around finding vulnerabilities in systems, who would probably never have any exposure to the Department of Defense. And we have them together at an event working on finding a vulnerability that is probably deeply frightening, right? Like, that's amazing. That's incredible. I think that that's important because this person right here, these people, the people who sometimes we don't get to come into the mission of national defense, I actually think that there's a spectacular need for them in the mission. We run an incredibly technical mission set. I want them to show up, but they're not going to do it unless they know that they are needed here, right? And how amazing that he can sit next to another person in uniform and they can work together, maybe for the first time in their life on something. And then maybe that hacker is going to walk away and they're going to say, hey, you know what I just did? I worked on something with the DoD. That was cool. And then maybe somebody else will. That's how we grow the rebellion. And if I can think of anything that's more important right now at this particular time, it's bringing in the people who are building the future of technology and bringing them into this mission. We have to grow the rebellion. But think about this in terms of all the other things that you're doing. Think about it, the other groups that you work with. You want to grow the rebellion. Because we have to build an insurgency. We have to find a coalition of the willing. A coalition of people who are willing to come along with us and go to other places and help do things that are unbelievable and precious at this moment in time, right? This young woman here, her name is Lisa Jones. She's a brilliant mathematician. We did a program at Defense Digital Service called Gen Urso from Rogue One, which was, I think, the #1 Star Wars movie. Lisa is a brilliant mathematician, and she worked with us on how to find really bad people in our networks. Some things that we worked on at DoD, one of our projects, and she's an incredible technologist. And I love this because on her last day as part of our team, before she would go on to do other great things and take the insurgency along with her, she bought that shirt, which, if you know her, is like kind of amazing because she's part of the rebellion, right? And she'll always be part of the rebellion. If we don't bring people along with our mission, we have lost the narrative. We have to bring those from the outside and we have to bring those from the inside to come along with us because people like you and people like me need more to come along with us. That's the special thing. That's how we do this. And I think that sometimes it's going to take extremely difficult fights. We worked on I love this. This person right there with the sunglasses doing all the nerding with Matt Cutts right there is just an amazing engineer. Again, coalition of the willing. Never knew that there was a need for his skills. Probably one of the best front-end software engineers in the entire country. Working on some things that we were doing to help with the Train, Advise, Assist mission in Afghanistan. And there was a fight to make that happen, right? Because a lot of times we don't think about actually going where the work is. Do you know how you build amazing products? You actually sit down with the people who use them. You don't talk to the person who used it about a year ago, which we do all the time. We're like, hey, talk to this person. This person was there a year ago. No, you go to where the work is. We built a device, a piece of hardware, as part of the Gen Urso program that would stop grenades from dropping on our military, right? Kind of worked like a force field in a way. Wasn't a jammer, didn't work and so all their comms would still work, which is really, really cool. But as we were going through the building, the Pentagon, we heard a lot of requirements. People were like, oh, you should make it work with cell phones. You can control it with laptops. We're like, okay, cool. So we built all this stuff, and then guess what? We go out there, and what's the first thing we hear? Too complicated. We don't have cell phones along with us. Nobody's going to train us. We probably aren't going to have a laptop to run it. How can that be? That's what we heard from the person who was there a year ago, right? So you know what we did? We just changed it. We were like, okay, we'll just put a little toggle. Off, detect, attack the drone. Psh, done. Now it doesn't require anything. Nothing fancy. We sat with users. We rewrote the entire system and how it worked while we were out there. It was amazing. Nobody would expect, by the way, going back to delivery is the superpower, that the day before, that the whole thing could be changed by the next day. That was amazing to them. They were like, wow, it works totally different the next day. Yeah, it does. That's normal. We just don't expect it. This is a slide about Star Trek. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. I think that it's up to us. People like you and people like me, but there's not enough of us. People like you and people like me can change a lot. I know that. I watched Hack the Pentagon. It was so funny. A small team doing something that seemed so small, right? And then one day we hear, hey, Congress is writing Hack the Pentagon into law for other agencies. Other agencies are adopting it. Other governments came and visited. They're like, hey, we're going to use your program. We can do this. It's up to you. It's up to us. But I do believe this. Nobody else is going to come and save us. So we have to do it together. That's the thing. And all these pieces, I believe that they're so true. I believe that they're so true. I have watched, and I don't even think, quite honestly, at the end of the day, that this is a message about the Department of Defense. I think I'm talking about what it means when people like you and people like me show up and we have to change something that is far bigger than us, and something that works in a way that we know needs to change and that it needs to do better. And I think that you can. And I know that it's possible because I have watched it in the most impossible of places. If you wish, shoot me an email, say hello. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think that this is our moment in time. And I am so excited that you're here because there's, where's Ben? Ben, where are you? There you are. Ben showed up at our office so long ago, told me about DEF. And I think then I was still learning even the basics of anything at the DoD. And to be talking to you all today is pretty special to me because I didn't quite understand all of this at that time and how important it was, but I do now. And I think that you're the key, so thank you very much. I don't know if we're going to do a Q&A audience thing? Okay, cool, we're going to do that. All right, sounds good. Does anybody have anything for me?
You talked about the whole job of the hacker is to find the vulnerability in the system. So, just having the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for, RD&A, looking at the combination of taking the hackers and not just hacking the Pentagon from an IT perspective, but also looking at them from a systems perspective. So potentially as you're developing that relationship with some of those individuals, exporting them beyond just that part of the infrastructure and actually looking at the processes and systems as far as how does the Pentagon DoD run, has there already been some appetite for taking some of those people out of there, and instead of the whole job is to find the vulnerability in the system, the whole job is to find the opportunity in the system?
Sure. So, it's interesting. I have a lot of people who would ask me questions about what type of, when I was at Defense Digital Service, they would say, hey, what are the types of people you would hire? And we would I would answer this, I would say we only hire four people. The first three are pretty obvious. We would hire software engineers. It's pretty obvious, right? We would hire product managers. That's somewhat less obvious to, I think, the department. Product manager would look at, they would actually enjoy working with the users. And they would like to take their feedback, and they would care that people would be happy to use the product, and they would advocate for them. We would have designers, which is, hey, is it actually delightful to use? But sometimes these last two, designers, and then the last one, bureaucracy hacker. People always ask me, what is a bureaucracy hacker? Bureaucracy hackers, and especially when you pair them with designers, and I'm not talking about design like how it looks, but how it works, is incredibly important, because sometimes we have to do very difficult things. We worked on a system a couple years ago that required a digital signature. Yeah, so you do digital signatures probably so much in your normal life, and there was a DoD policy that looked nothing like that. Like it basically was like, hey, you have to like sign it in blood. It like has to be mailed to indoor, where it has to be approved by a Wookiee. There's like all kinds of weird things that it had in there, right? And it didn't like look like anything. It made no sense. And we had a bunch of designers look at, okay, here's the process of how people are using this in the workflow, and the intent is that we just want to have basically a legally binding agreement that the person understands what they're doing. And then we had bureaucracy hackers who actually went and redid. This is an amazing person who's at the Department of Defense, Sharon Woods. We actually called it the Woods Memo. Worked to undo all of the craziness where the department had actually lagged rational, reasonable decision-making in our normal lives. And it became that you could actually just have like a click-through, just like your normal life, where you're like, I agree. Right? That's actually allowed. So when you see a system even till today, and it's like, put your CAC card in, like, have somebody do backflips, like all that is actually not required anymore, right? But sometimes we have to look at how things work. And I know that you asked a bigger and broader question, but I think that the combination of design research and how we think about how things function and the workflow of things are actually incredibly important. And we have to do them all.
So the success story of what you've done with digital services blows my hair back a lot.
Thank you.
And being someone who thinks differently in an organization of folks that, really see that as dangerous.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to kind of move the needle on that, but I would ask maybe from your perspective, how do you cross-pollinate more of what you've done with the defense digital services across the Pentagon? Can't change it all in one day.
That's right.
And if you were to lay out the design of how you could do that, how could you measure it so that you would know 5 or 10 years down the road that it actually kind of spread in a way that made all the pain and the angst worth the doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do we know that what we're doing is actually working? Well, one, you can measure the number of things that are named after Star Wars. So that's one. That's one measurement. Another way to look at it, we had a project a few years ago. It was actually one of our first projects, and to be quite honest, like I really debated if we were. I didn't really go into the other two criteria, but so remember there are 3 criteria we would have for projects. It doesn't matter. Do we have buy-in from the highest possible level in case we need to really escalate? But then the last one is actually a really, really important one. What makes us so special? Why are we the ones who are able to help here? Sometimes we actually lose sight of that, right? And everybody can have an opinion on everything, right? But quite honestly, the majority of my team, we're a bunch of nerds who care about nerd things, right? So like, what makes us so special? And so years ago, we had a project. Has anybody ever used, there's a thing, have you ever used GPS? Has anybody ever used that? Yeah, okay, all right, cool. So we were working on part of the ground control system for GPS. It wasn't going so well. We worked on basically continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI/CD pipelines. And we started using the term at the time that really nobody was super familiar with. We were like, we want you to start doing DevOps. We want you to start doing DevOps. This was an Air Force system, and really nobody at the time was like super focused on this term. Most of them had never really heard of it. And we were like, you need to start doing DevOps. And we showed them how to do like automation and how to like take one of, a couple dozen very complicated system components and automate the things that they were doing. And we were tiny then. I put, quite honestly, some of the most amazing people on that project. This was right as we were getting started. So this is probably about 4 years ago. And boy, we had such a great team. We had one of the individuals on the team had built the original, what they call site reliability engineering team at Google. A guy by the name of Matt Weaver, who was on my team. We had probably one of the first another really early person over at Google who was another SRE, Carla Geiser, just stunning team. Anyway, they went out there and they took something that was taking months and months, and they basically were able to have at least one of these things, go from months to a couple hours. And everybody's like, wow, DevOps is amazing. Everything should be DevOps, right? And out of that, then we started talking about a system called AOC. Has anybody heard of that one? Yeah, that one wasn't going well either. And all these things would eventually come together, and we would start to watch this idea of continuous integration and deployment and DevOps start to percolate around the department. And we were pushing with then the Secretary of the Air Force, and then the Undersecretary of Acquisition, all this idea of, hey, everything here, we want to have you be able to measure the amount of time it takes for a software developer to write code to show up in something that looks like a production system. And that would go into so many different things, and then out of that, there would be a big push for things that would eventually be Kessel Run and a bunch of other stuff. I think that that's amazing. I think I'm giving you a long-winded answer to something I'm going to say is, I don't exactly know, but I know that it'll happen around you in ways that you don't anticipate. Here's one thing, though. Where most people get lost here is that I believe that when we watch change happen, we want 100% fidelity. I think that that is a flaw. I think it's okay for things to kick off and not be perfect. I think that we're looking at a set of rebels and an insurgency in other areas that are going to try different things, and they're going to work a different way. Some of them may win. Some of them may become far more successful at it. Some of them may be spectacular, and some may fail, and that's okay. We need more of us. That's the goal. So support all those things. But I'm going to give you one other little answer that I think is really important. When I started Defense Digital Service, I loved it because it was so new, right? Like, everybody was like, wait a minute, you want me to, I was convincing people who, quite honestly, in their minds were like living in an ivory tower, and they're like, I don't know anything about defense. And I was like, hey, I want you to take a lot less money and come do this, but come do it for a year. They're like, that's not a good sales pitch at all. And I was like, oh, no, by the way, it'll be very frustrating and suck. And you may fail. And but they still did it because I think that deep down, humans want to work on things that matter. They want to actually work on things that are important. And I used to get this question all the time. I don't get it as much anymore. Where do you see it in 5 to 10 years? And here's what my answer would be, which I think applies to many things here, especially for you and the coalition of the willing that is in this room. If tomorrow you could work on something that changed or saved a person's life, you can work on something so spectacular, and in that moment, you will have such a profound impact on the future of another person. But the next day, it were to all go away, would you still do it? And I think The answer is yes. It is fucking yes. That's the thing. That is what people want. They want to work on things that matter. That's what makes us, the people in this room, so special. I think I answered your question.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, let's give a warm round of applause for Chris Lynch.